This is International Master Eric Kislik, and today we have a fun one. Caruana won with black in the final round of the candidates against Grischuk. This was quite a wild game, and Grischuk was playing for a win, so he certainly deserves credit there. He tried to unbalance the position in the opening, and Caruana played well pretty much throughout, so he definitely deserves credit for his play. All the games in this round were really exciting, went right down to the wire. Finally, Caruana won, so it was a well-deserved victory. Let's get to it. So this started off as a Petrov. E4, E5, knight f3, knight f6. Caruana played this earlier in the tournament as well. He did not face d4, knight takes e4, d takes e5, changing the pawn structure. So here one of the moves is to play bishop c5, attacking the f2 pawn, and this leads to really wild variations after bishop c4, knight takes f2, takes, queen d5 check, picking off the c5 bishop, at the cost of sacrificing the h1 rook. This leads to really, really wild variations after knight c3, h6. So he may have simply worked out a perpetual check with white, but it's hard to tell. So we got to see what happened after d5 in the game. Probably Caruana was hoping to keep the tension himself, so it makes sense that he played this. After bishop d3, knight c5, just trying to obtain the bishop pair. If bishop e2, black can just play knight e6, and this is a comfortable equal position. So knight bd2 was played, black played knight takes d2, exchanging off, and after bishop takes d2, black just wanted to develop naturally. He just went bishop to e7, and his plan was to play c5 afterwards. So bishop d3 was played, and black played c5. If we look at the central pawn structure, fundamentally black doesn't have any problems. He's just going to develop with knight c6, and he might play bishop to g4. And you'll see within a few moves, black solves all the problems with his minor pieces. So c3 was played. Another move is c4, although if black just simply takes and castles, there are clearly no problems at all. For instance, knight c6, it's quite obvious black is doing quite fine there. Basically, the position is free. White doesn't have any space advantage, so black has no trouble at all. c3 was played. Black went knight c6. One idea for white can be to go h3 just to prevent bishop g4. And black can just follow up with bishop e6 and queen to d7, and black is equal here as well. So castling was played. Bishop to g4. Now white played rook e1, just defending the e5 pawn. Another way to defend it is just to go queen e2 and put the other rook on e1, rook a e1 this way. And after queen to d7, for instance, h3, bishop f5, and the position is equal here as well. So rook e1 was played. And now queen to d7, h3, bishop h5. So the problem here for white is if we look at this pawn structure, there aren't that many plans fundamentally for striking back against it. What's white going to play? You know, for instance, is white going to play for f4? That seems a bit unlikely. White has already decided to not play c4. So one of the only plans is to try to play for b4 and maybe even to play for g4 at some point. So one idea, combining a couple of those plans, is to play a3, rook d8, g4, and let's say takes, knight to g5. This is a very interesting way to play. But I think black can just take it and play rook to c8. I think black has no trouble at all here. So unfortunately, it's very hard for white to turn this into anything. So bishop to f4 was played, securing the e5 pawn. Black went queen to e6, a nice solid move. a6 is also good. Bishop g3, rook d8. Black has no trouble at all here. So queen e6 was played, and white decided to go for a3. Perhaps more circumspect would have just been to go bishop e2, just breaking the pin, and then playing queen d2, and the plan of playing rook a to b1, and now the idea can just be to play b4 this way without needing to prepare it with a3, and what this also does is it brings the b1 rook into play, following the principle of improving your worst place piece. So a3 was tried, castle b4. As I said, you know, you might be a little confused by this plan, but it makes sense, and of course black is not going to take and improve white's structure, so black is just going to maintain the tension here and simply play the move h6, a good solid move, and white decided to play bishop g3 here. Well, the problem was I still think it would have been best to simply break the pin, just to go bishop e2, rook a d8, the most natural move for black, improving the worst place piece like I was mentioning before. B takes c5, bishop takes c5, and now try to exchange with knight to d4, takes. So here, white would be able to maintain the balance. White's d4 pawn is safe. Everything is comfortable here. There would have been no major problems. But after bishop g3, The problem is, let's say black had simply played rook a to d8. Now if white plays rook c1, again the same idea, improving the worst placed piece. If black goes c4 and simply goes a6, let's continue a few more moves. For instance, if knight to d4, knight takes d4, queen takes d4, takes, black has the move bishop to d6, and already here black has the better pawn structure. So that's part of the problem that white experiences here after bishop g3. It looks like he couldn't really hit upon a great plan. So black played b6, of course just a solid move. As again, he most likely was hoping to keep the tension and didn't want to commit to c4, although perhaps in other playing conditions he may have played the rook a d8 and c4 plan. So white decided to go for knight d4, which did make a lot of sense. This may look like a surprising move, but both of the queens are attacked. He's hoping to exchange. A safer move would have been to play simply rook c1, improving the worst placed piece. And if rook f d8, an interesting move like bishop a6 makes sense, preventing rook c8. So for instance, black can just play a move like rook a b8. So knight d4 was played. Bishop takes d1, knight takes e6, f takes e6. So here's a big strategic decision for white, which white may not have realized was such an important strategic decision. And so rook a d1 seemed to make sense. Basically the idea was just bringing the rook into play while it seemed to be passive. But as you'll see here, this actually turned out to be a mistake. And what would have been a better move would have been to play rook e takes d1. And here's the point. The rook on a1 is actually useful in the main line here where black plays c4. So let me illustrate the point. If c4, bishop c2, bishop g5 is very similar to what happened in the game. White can play a4. And so now if we get a position like this, like takes b5, we can sacrifice the pawn on e5, but we get to play rook to e1. And here there are tactical issues. So white gets very good counterplay in this case, but you'll see what happens in the game. So what happens in the game is that the rook on d1 actually turns out to be rather ineffective, and there was a really nice idea black could have played. So after c4, bishop c2, b5, a4, a6. So in this particular variation, it makes sense why the rook on a1 would have been better placed for sure. So white played f3, which also makes good sense, and black went for bishop g5, which of course is not a bad move. It makes perfect sense why he played it, although there was a really nice idea which was probably underestimated. What he could have played now was simply knight takes b4, which might seem surprising, just sacrificing the piece for only 2 pawns, but take a look at the resulting position. Let's say we simply take it and then go bishop to e7, takes, rook b1, b4. Now look at those 3 connected passed pawns. What matters more, the 3 connected passed pawns while having 2 pawns for the piece, or the piece? Well, those pawns are extremely strong, and black is undoubtedly much better here. So that would have been one improvement for black, but what was played was still quite good. So bishop g5, and now white should have played h4 with the idea of bishop f4, takes, and then bishop to g6. And now the problem is it's a little bit hard for black to find a way to break through here. So for instance, if rook c8, takes, black can try to go for the d4 plan because there simply isn't another effective plan. So let's say if h5, d4, takes, white can just play bishop e4, and black can even push the pawn, and arguably this is most likely what, this kind of concept or kind of idea was most likely what bothered white and why it wasn't played. But if we actually look at the line here, it isn't actually clear whether white's able to win this position or not. So, whether black's able to win this position or not. So, because if we ever play knight to b3, there's always rook takes c2. So this would have been very, very unclear. It's a very interesting position. It may simply end up just being a fortress here. So that would have been very, very interesting. Bishop f2 was played, but the problem after bishop f2 is take a look at the position that we get here. So bishop f4 was quite a nice move, putting pressure on the e5 pawn. Bishop c5, rook f d8. Yeah, this was a very interesting position because there was also the idea of sacrificing the exchange here and then trying to target these pawns. But in that case, after taking the exchange, white can play rook e3, and it's not clear if black's going to pick up that c3 pawn or not because everything is secure in white's position. So I think rook f d8 was the best move Bishop to d6, so he's securing the pawn. Bishop g3, rook e2, g5. A very strong move. Again, just kind of tying everything down, making it difficult for white to find a useful move. King f1, king f7, another excellent move. Bishop c7, rook e8. Okay, so now rook ac8 was played. Rook a1. So white decided, well, my rook's not doing much, so I might as well put it on the a file here. Rook ed8 was played. White played bishop to b1. So this looks like best play for both sides. There weren't really any obvious plans for white to go for, while black was simply improving his position move by move. So now white played rook a3, but the problem was this allowed the breakthrough of d4. So what white should have played is a takes b5, a takes b5, rook a6. This is just a more active idea. And now black can play rook a7, exchanging off that pesky a6 rook, and after takes, rook a2, knight c6, rook a6. White's just trying to be as active as possible with the rook. Black can play d4. And this again looks very, very good for black. So for instance, if bishop e4, we can just play d takes c3 because of the strength of the c-pawn. So here black has a very good position as well. So let's take a look at what happened after rook a3. So d4 was a great shot. Takes, and then knight takes d4. Rook ea2. So basically white really had no choice besides to try to be as active as possible with the rooks. Knight c6, and now we have some definite problems here. Black has a very strong protected pass pawn. The e5 pawn is weak, and it's really not easy to see what white should be doing here. So bishop to e4 was played. Bishop takes e5. Bishop takes c6 was played. And now rook takes d6 was played. So this is most likely what white was hoping for, and was hoping would end up being a draw, but it wasn't. So if bishop takes e5, knight takes e5, rook a5, there's simply rook b8. Black holds on to the pawn and wins. So bishop takes c6, rook takes d6, bishop takes b5 was played. Now it's 4 versus 4 with opposite colored bishops, and that's presumably why white thought that he had drawing chances here, but there's simply rook to g1. And here's the problem. So let's say if check and bishop to d7, black can just take, and then play rook c7. And this will be winning for black. So king e3 was played. So actually, this wasn't perfectly converted. There were some chances that white had to draw in the coming play. So at the moment, there aren't, but the simplest would have just been to advance with c3. So for instance, if check, bishop a4, black can play rook c1, trying to prepare to play c2. So rook to b1 was played. Now the best chance would have been to play rook a8. So if rook takes b4, white can play bishop a4. And here, the main point is that the c-pawn is just not that easy to push, because it's really only going to be supported by the rook. So here, there definitely would have been chances to draw here. This would have been really difficult for black to win in a practical game. So this was by far the best drawing chance to play rook to a8. So rook a7 check was played, but the problem is after king f6, now black is just getting ready to push. Just getting ready to push the c-pawn. So bishop d7 was played. If rook 7 a6, black can just check and go c3. So bishop d7 was played. Bishop f4 check, good move. Rook to d8, also a very good move. Rook c2, and just simply rook takes b4. So black is up a pawn and preparing to advance that c-pawn. So bishop c6 was played, and now black simply advanced with c3, and this was good. Rook to b1 may have been a little faster with this idea of playing rook db8 and going like this. Basically, what you can see here is, let's say if you sacrifice the pawn, then you have rook be1, and we're threatening to checkmate the king here. So this would have been probably a slightly faster win, but it's a little bit irrelevant in the course of the game. c3 was a very safe move. So, for instance, if rook a3, we just play bishop e5. If bishop e4, we play rook to b2. And in the long run, black is going to win this, much like in the game. So rook to d7 was played, and now a strong move could have been to just play rook to b2 and then play rook db8, but he probably saw no need to go for that. So he simply went rook c8, bishop e4, h5, and okay, if rook to b7, we can go rook d4, and we can go rook a4, and slowly black is just making more and more progress, and eventually going to break through here. So king to d3 is played, rook to b2, and black just fixed the position on the king side and was preparing to break through with the king. So king to e5, rook a1, rook to d8, rook d1, trying to prevent rook d2 check, rook db8, rook a1, bishop d2. So the king is finally getting ready to break through. Rook to d8, rook to c6, rook to b1, king f2, rook to a1, just kind of securing the rook here. Rook c4, rook d4, rook c8, rook b4. Yeah, everything's working out nicely for black here, slowly making more and more progress. Also, there are ideas of going after the king here. So, for instance, if bishop h7, we can just go rook to b2. And if rook c4, we can play rook a2, takes. And here, black is going to queen very, very soon. So, for instance, if here, then the game is over after this. So, king e2 was played. And yeah, here this was just a simple practical win with king f4. You know, there were other ways to win. You could check and play this, and again, you're trying to play for mate, so that would have been winning as well. But king f4 was perfectly good. King f2, rook bb1 is very similar. Rook f8 check, king to e5, bishop d3, rook b2, king e2 was played, and then simply check and rook c1. And finally, that blockading rook has been challenged. And takes, rook b8, bishop c3, securing the pawn, bishop e4 check, king e2, king to f4, rook b4, e5, securing the bishop, and finally the king breaks through to g3, and white had enough and realized this was going to be over in a couple of moves, so may as well just resign here. The g2 pawn is going to fall very, very soon. So a fantastic conversion by Caruana, very strong play throughout, really, really strong technique. White just had maybe one chance on move 40 to defend better, but very, very difficult from a practical perspective. So both players definitely deserve credit in this game for good play. You know, Grischuk, he did his best to keep tension in the position. He tried to simplify at the right moment and was even pretty close to holding the position. But unfortunately, Caruana's play was too strong. So fantastic play from Caruana, and congratulations for qualifying for the World Championship.